Hey everyone, in this video we'll learn about AWS. This video is perfect for getting started with AWS. If you have never tried AWS before and always wanted to dive into this domain, this is the video you need to watch. Talking about AWS, it consists of 200 plus services. Out of these 200 and plus services, I've chosen one of the best among them, and that is AWS Amplify for you. So what is Amplify? Amplify is a service to help us build applications with minimal code. Let's take an example of a to-do application to understand what do I mean. In order to create a backend for a simple to-do application, we need to write 100 plus lines of code in Node.js. While on the other hand, we just need 5 lines of code in case of Amplify. So here's the deal. We'll create frontend for our app using React. You can choose whatever framework you want, but I would still recommend to learn React. And for the backend, we'll no longer be using Node.js or Django or any other traditional framework. Instead, we'll use Amplify for that. And please please note this, that the backend created using Amplify is known as serverless backend. And applications built with serverless backend is what we call serverless applications, if you've heard it before. So basically, Amplify is a service to build serverless applications. Enough of the introduction. Now let's see what we're gonna building in this video. So we'll build a simple to-do application that has the facility to create to-do. Let's create one with a name to-do1 and a description. Description is awesome. So we'll create this to-do. As you can see, we have created this to-do here, and it has the facility to delete the to-do as well. So let's try to delete it. It alerted us, and let's say okay, and it deleted the to-do. So this is gonna be a simple application for this video that we'll be building along. Let's dive into the video. We'll be starting with our tutorial very soon with our first module, but you need to satisfy some prerequisite for this tutorial. The first one being an AWS account. You have to make an AWS account by yourself. I can't cover this in this tutorial because it takes some time for the verification and it's a long process. It took me 2 days for the verification. It varies person to person. And the second requirement of this tutorial is a Git. You must have Git installed on your system. Third being Node.js. Actually, we need Node.js for NPM packages. And the fourth being React.js. You have to satisfy these 4 requirements before starting with the tutorial. So make sure you have it. Amplify is known for its serverless backend, but it is also an amazing platform to host your front-end applications. Applications like React application, Angular application, and it supports a bunch of others also. In this module, we'll build a Hello World application and we'll deploy it to Amplify. And I'll show you how simple is deploying an application or front-end application on Amplify is. This process involves 3 steps, and we'll discuss each of them one by one. Step 1 is to create a local React app. We'll create a Hello World app. Let's do this. Creating a React app is simple. You need to write this command. What should we call our app? Let's call it To-Do app. Now it will create an app for us. Let's skip that part. Okay, so our app is successfully created. Now our next job is to clean the app. So let's go to the VS Code and cd into our app folder and go to the VS Code. Okay, so let's clean it. In the public folder, we'll delete this one. We'll delete these three files. We'll keep these three only. And in the source folder, we'll delete everything except three files. We'll keep it, delete, delete. We'll keep these three and delete rest of them. Great. We'll also remove the default readme. Great. And now let's clean some code inside the files. Go to the app.js, delete everything, and just div, and we need to write h1 with hello world. Okay, and we are not also importing this one. Okay, now go to the index.js and remove this thing. Are we left with something? Yes, remove it. Index.css, we do not have that file. Okay, okay, yeah, we're good to go now. Now let's try to spin up the terminal and see if everything works fine. That looks really good. Our app is working fine. Let's move on to the step 2, and that is pushing our app to the GitHub. Let's do this. For that, we need to create a GitHub repo for our app. So let's do this. .com, and here you choose new repo. Call it whatever you want. I'll call just simple to do app, and just create the repository. Great. Now we need to copy this URL. We'll need it. I just copied it. Now go back to our VS Code, and there we are. Here, let's close our instance of the React app first. Okay, so just clear it, and then we just we need to set the oh, you already know how to do that, right? Git remote add origin, and we'll paste the address of our app GitHub repo. Okay, now just git add everything, git commit with a message, or first commit, or I can say clean hello world app. I forgot to mention that we created clean hello world app, and just all we have to do is to commit it. Now it's time to push. Great. Now let's go back to our browser to see whether our app has been our repo has been created or not. So let's refresh it. Amazing. So from now onwards, we'll move to the third step. Let's go. So the third step finally is to host our app on Amplify. Let's see how we can do that. Spin up a new tab and search for AWS console, and you can find it here. Login, sign into the console. Okay, so here's how our interface of AWS look like. When you'll create your account, you will not have these recently visited services here. I visited these services, that's why they are indexed here, but you'll have a clean interface, whatever. Also make sure that you set the nearest region. It will be by default set for you. Just do not change this region anytime in your development routine. Okay, so you will not have these services like that, so you have to search here Amplify. There you go, it AWS Amplify will go there, and I have already created an Amplify app. You have to go to the new app, and here you have two options: build an app and host web app. So as I told you, we already created our front end app, the React app. Now we need to host the app, so just click on host web app. Now it will ask you from where. It provide multiple sources from where you can host your app. So we have our app hosted on GitHub. We'll choose GitHub and continue. Okay, so you need to pause here and look. I have already connected my GitHub to my AWS account. The procedure is really simple. The AWS itself guide you through the procedure. It's not very much difficult. It just take GitHub authorization. I've already connected it. I can't show you again. Okay. So once you connect your GitHub to the AWS Amplify, it will show you this interface. It will give you the option to select the repository that your app contains. So we know that we have created to do app repository, so just select it, and it says which branch. We'll set it to default that our latest commit is on master branch. Go to the next, and just keep it default and go to the next. Now we're finally save and deploy. Just wait for a second, and there we go. So this app will get through 4 steps. It will be first provisioned, then it will build the application, then deploy, and then verify. Once these 4 steps are completed, you can access your app from this link. So let's skip to this part. Great, so all 4 steps are successfully completed. There is no error, so you can access your app from this link, and it's hosted. Wow, so you just learned how to deploy a front-end only application on AWS. So let's move on to our next module, CI/CD pipeline, continuous integration and continuous deployment pipeline. What is it? Let's try to understand. In previous module, we connected GitHub with Amplify to host the app. When you connect GitHub with Amplify, it creates a pipeline for deployment. Every time you push a new change to the app, GitHub sends alert to the Amplify, then Amplify automatically builds the app for you. Let's see this in action, and this process, this pipeline that enable the Amplify to continuously integrate the code and deploy it is what we call CI/CD pipeline. So we are inside our VS Code. I'll make a simple change here and push it to the GitHub. let's say version 2. That's our to change. Let's spin up the terminal and -m created version 2. Looks good. Now all we have to do is git push. Oops, I'm sorry. Git push origin master. Great. Let's see what happened. On GitHub, you can see that it's showing the commit that we just made, and on our console, you can see the app is again building. It got provisioned, and if you go to this link, it still shows hello world. Why? Because the app is not successfully built and verified. That's why it's still links to the previous version. Let's wait for some time and see what happens when all 4 steps complete. So it's done, and let's go to this link again, and you can see it shows version 2. Great. We just learned about the continuous integration and deployment pipeline. So here a part of hosting front-end only application completes. Now we'll move on to our backend implementation, that is creating the serverless app using Amplify. Let's do this. So it's time to build the backend for our to-do application, and for that you have to go to this backend environment tab. You'll get to see this interface. Now let's get started, and it will load for some time. Once the loading is complete, you will get redirected to this dashboard again. And if we go to the backend environment, you'll see there's a option to launch the studio. So what is studio? Studio is basically a graphical user interface to build your serverless application. You can build your the backend for your application right from there. You can add all these services, API, data, authentication. But are we gonna use it? Well, no, we're not gonna use it. Instead, what we'll do is to build the application locally on our system, and then we'll push the changes to the Amplify. You might ask me why. Well, right now our application is quite simple. So it doesn't make any much difference whether you build it using the graphical user interface or locally on your system. But as you start building complex applications, you need to test those applications before pushing changes to the Amplify. And you can't really test the application using this interface. In order to test the application, you need to build it locally. So it's a good idea to learn how to build applications locally and push it to the AWS Amplify. So let's get started. In order to build the app locally, we need a tool called Amplify CLI. It's a tool, or precisely I would say it's a NPM package that we need. What does it do? So to create the serverless backend, we need the studio architecture. So the Amplify CLI basically simulate that architecture locally on our system. So that we can build the application locally and then we can push them. And it also help us to push the application to the backend as well. Basically, it provides all the functionality to build our application locally on a system. So let's install the package, and we'll be installing the package globally. npm install -g at AWS Amplify /CLI. So this is the command to install this package, the tool, whatever you want to say, and it's gonna take some time, so skip that part. Great, we have it installed. Our next thing we need to do is to configure the Amplify CLI. What does it mean to configure it? It basically means to authorizing the CLI install on our system to access the resources on our AWS account. So let's do that. The command is simple, is amplify configure. and it will redirect us to a browser window, and it will automatically authorize the CLI as we have already logged in into our AWS account. So if we go back to that, it has been authorized. Now it says press enter to continue. Let's do that. Now it says specify the region, and for that go to your console and look at the region here. It's AP South 1 in my case, so I have to select the same one. So let's find out where it is. It's AP South 1. It says to specify a username, keep it default, and the next thing it says is it redirected us to create a new IAM user. IAM user in AWS stands for Identity Access Management User. Identity means who, access means can access what. So IAM user are basically some users created for a AWS account that has some permissions to access some services. So why CLI wanted us to create a new IAM user? Well, because CLI act as a IAM user for our AWS account. So let's do this. All you have to do is to press next, 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 and create user. Once the user is created, you will get these credentials: access key ID and secret access key. Do not share these two with anyone else. Okay, so copy it from here and go back to the terminal and press enter, because we have created the IAM user, and just paste the access key ID here and press enter. Wait a second, control shift V. Yep, it's pasted. Now it's asking to paste the secret access key. Now I'm gonna pause the video for a second. Okay, let's paste the secret access key now. It says what should be the profile name, keep it default. We really don't need to tweak around. Great. So we have configured the API so far. Now we have our tool ready, and it's time to initialize the app locally on our system. And for that, we need to go to the dashboard, and here we have to copy this command. And once copied, you have to paste it into the terminal. So let's do this. Paste it here, and you can notice that this is a command run by the Amplify CLI. It's a pull command that is pulling the app ID is this, and the environment you don't really need to care about, and press enter. So this process is gonna take some time. So I'll pause the video and skip to the part. When you amplify pull, it will ask you, it will redirect you to the browser window and try to verify that it's you. So you have to say yes. It will authenticate, and if we go back to the terminal, it start creating the app. So just press enter. It will automatically detect the environment. It says what's your default editor? Yes, it's Visual Studio Code. JavaScript, yes, it's a React application. Just press enter. You don't need to change anything here, and wait for some time. So it says, do you plan to modify this backend? Yes, always press yes for that. Now it's gonna take some time. Okay, so it has successfully pulled the backend environment, and if you notice that it has created an Amplify folder here. And please make sure that when you run this pull command, it should be run in your project directory. For example, the to-do app was my project directory, my React app, so it should be run there. What it will do, it will create an Amplify folder. So this folder will contain all the backend information, all the information about our serverless application. The next thing it has done is it modified the git ignore file, and it has added some git ignore list here that we don't really need to care about, to be honest. So what's the next step? Although we have backend, but it's empty. It doesn't include any services yet. So for a to-do application, what do we need? We need two things. To store the to-do, we need a database, and to create, delete, or all sort of CRUD operation, we need a API. Luckily, we don't need to worry about the database because AWS provide a service called AppSync to handle that stuff for you. Hey, what is AppSync? So AppSync provide a GraphQL API, and behind the scenes it will manage the database for you. All you have to do is to create the API in your application, and the database will be automatically managed by the AppSync service itself. So let's add the API, and to add API you have to write this command amplify add API. And if you need to add another service, you just need to replace the API with that service name. Okay, let's do this. So it's asking which API you want, and as I told you, we need GraphQL API this time. So let's do this. Press enter. Now it's creating the API with some default configuration. For example, it says the service is GraphQL, and the name for the API will be to do app. Okay, the authorization mode will be API key, that you can change. It supports multiple other authorization modes, but for this tutorial I'll keep it simple and keep it to API key. Conflict detection, it's something that you really no need to care about, and it should be disabled by default. And the API key will expire 7 days from now. Now if you want to change the authorization mode, or if you want to extend the days for the expiration day, you don't need to click enter. Instead you will press the up arrow, but I'll keep it default, so I'll just press enter here. So it will give you a schema template to get you started, but we really don't need it. So let's click on the blank schema, and I'm using the arrow keys up and down to select these options. Okay, great. It's asking, do you want to edit the schema now? Yes, of course I want to. So for that I'll press yes, and it open the GraphQL schema.graphql file. This file is gonna be the file which will store your schema, right? And you can find this app. Go to the Amplify folder, backend, API, and your API name. Here you can find this file if you want to change it again. So everything in a GraphQL schema is a type. So if I say type to do, it will create a type of to do. But if I add a directive at modal, as I told you, AppSync manage the database behind the scenes. So as I add the directive modal, it will create a table in the database named to do, and that if I add the properties like the ID, which has a type ID and it's required, the name will be the type string, and description of the to do will be the type string again. And let's make it capitalized. Now as I told you that at model directive, create a table in the database, and these properties you see here will create the respective column of that table, and there's data type for that particular column as well, or property, whatever you say. And what is this exclamation mark doing here? The exclamation mark says this field can't be empty. You have to provide a field, otherwise while creating the to do, otherwise it will raise an error. So this is the simplest form of GraphQL schema, and that's all we need to code in order to code our backend for the to-do application. It's just 4 to 5 lines that we need to code, and I told you, if we'll be coding the same thing in Node.js, it will take us 100 plus lines of code to do the same. So essentially we have built our application locally. It's time to push it to the Amplify or our AWS account. And how do we do that? Well, there is a simple command, amplify push. It will push all the local changes to the Amplify app, right? And it's a long process. It will take somewhere around 5 to 10 minutes, depend on your connection. So it's a better idea to pause the video here, okay? And it might ask you for some confirmations. Are you sure you want to continue? And if you don't want these confirmation again and again, you can just Control C. You can press Control C to cancel that, implement that command execution, and go again run the command with the argument --y. So it will by default say yes, yes, yes to every other confirmation it will ask for. So let's wait for it. Oh, don't wait for it. It will take a lot of time to finally push the app. So the execution completes here, and our app has been successfully pushed to the Amplify. Now if we go back to the dashboard here, it says deployment completed, and if you refresh it, it says categories added and it says API, and if you click on it, it will say view in AppSync, because I told you the API functionality is provided by a service called AppSync. Let's see what we have got there. So here you can see a lot of options related to your API. For example, settings contain the API ID, URL. Make sure these are some sensitive information that you do not share with anyone else. I'll be deleting this application just after I upload the YouTube, just after I upload this video. And you have some queries that we'll be using. I told you how we'll be using it. Then you have data sources, and it says to do table. So from here you can see your table actually in the database. So it's loading, and it uses a service from a service called DynamoDB that is again provided by AWS as a database. And if I click on explore table items, it says items return 0, because we do not have any to do in our app right now. So can we create one? Yes, we can, using the same API console. You need to go to the queries, and here, if you have some little bit experience with GraphQL, you know that GraphQL has two types of queries. The one is query itself, and the second one is query. It does have subscription as well, but that is out of the scope of this video, right? We'll be talking about query and the mutation. So briefly, query means is to get the information from the database, right? So it has two get query and list to dos. These two queries are available. Get to do and list to dos. These two queries are available to us. And mutation involves, if I click on mutation and click on the plus button, we get three types of mutation: create, delete, and update the to do. So every type or every type with a model directive you create in GraphQL, AppSync automatically generate these queries and mutation for them. So let's say I want to create a to do. What do I need to do? I go to this drop down, select the mutation, click on the add button and select the create to do option. And in the input I'll provide name. It says star. It says it is compulsory to provide this value, otherwise it will not create the entry into the database. But the star should be provided with ID as well. Well, to be what happened behind the scene is the IDs get generated automatically by the AWS itself. So all we need to care about is the name right now. So if I provide the name and I say to do 1, and the description is optional to provide, but let's provide it. It says some description, and there are some options that what do I want in return, what values I want in return to show when my to do is successfully created. So I want to see the ID and the name. We'll see that the auto generated ID, let's say description as well. So I'll execute this query here, and as you can see it has been successfully executed. And if I go back to the table and refresh it from here, this is the to do table, and I refresh it from here, you can see there's an entry. We have ID, type name, created at description, and the name as well. So here's how you create a to do from apps in console. Next we will see to delete the to do from the same apps in console. So for that you need to close this and click on the delete. You do not necessarily have to close this, do not worry, you can add additional mutation here. Click on the delete to do. Sorry, you have to clear it. Okay, you need just click on the delete to do. It take one input, and this is the star says it is compulsory that you have to give this input, the ID of the to do that you want to delete. So we received it before when we created the to do. Just copy it from here and paste it. You can paste here or here, it's optional. Just paste it. And what are the again the return values you want? Let's say I want return name and description when the to do gets successfully deleted. Let's run this, and we got the values. Now go back to the table and refresh it. See, item returned 0, or to do has been successfully deleted. Just like we created and deleted the to do, we can also query the to dos in our database. But in order to query, we need some to dos already in our database. So let's create some of them. So let's give it a name. Let's give 1, 2, 3, anything. And yeah, we created this to do. We will create another to do. So right now we have 3 to dos in our database. Let's try to list one of them. So go to the query and add list to dos. It will list all the to dos available in your database. Go to items and select which return values you want. So we want ID, name, and description. And our to dos do not have description, so it will return null for that. You can see all the to dos here, 3 objects that we have returned. Great. So we just saw that how we can interact with our API, with our database using this console, the apps in console. But essentially we want to interact it from front end. So how can we interact this API using a React app from a React app? So let me show you how to do that. So we are inside our app.js. Here I will create a function, asynchronous function, fetch to dos. And let's say as of now it says I'm fetching to dos. and we will also create a button that will trigger this function on click equal to fetch to dos, and we can say fetch to do or list to do, whatever you are comfortable with. And let's see if this button is working correctly. So we'll start our application. Okay, so inspect element and go to the console. As soon as I click on fetch to dos, it triggers the function. So okay, the function is working correctly. Now go back to our application, and as of now just close the terminal. Now to interact with Amplify services, we again need a special to interact with these services in React application. We need another library, and that is AWS Amplify library. So let's spin up a new terminal and install the library. The command is npm install AWS Amplify. This is not Amplify CLI. This is a library that a React project need in order to interact with Amplify services. Okay, so let it finish. Okay, so it has been installed. Now let's see how to use it. So AWS Amplify library provide a special class API that we can use to interact with GraphQL APIs. So let's import that class, that is API from AWS Amplify. And this API class has a function GraphQL. So it should be like API.GraphQL, and this GraphQL function will help us to execute the query and mutation to our API. Okay, so it takes a parameter called query, and it also optionally take a parameter called variables. In case of list query, we don't need to provide the variables parameter, so we can skip it for now. In query, it takes the query string. So where we can get the query string? For that, you need to go to the AppSync console, where it was here. There it is. You have to copy this query, Control C, and store it some variable. Let's call it variable list to do query. Set it equal to string, this one, and provide this variable here. Let's store the response in a variable. Let response equal to, and make sure you use the await keyword, because this is gonna be an asynchronous call, and log the response. Okay, so when I click on fetch to dos button, it should fetch the actual to dos in our database, and it should log those into the console. So go to a React app and try to do that. So it's fetching to dos. Oops, I'm sorry, the app is not yet updated. Go to the nodes and refresh our app here, and now click on fetch to do. And the error says Amplify has not been configured correctly. I intentionally wanted to show you this error. What does it mean? Although our application has the correct syntax to fetching the to-dos, but our React application do not have any idea, any information about our API. It doesn't have access to the API key. So how can we give it that crucial information? How can I configure a React app for that? In order to do that, I want to show you the source folder, and there's a file called AWS export. This file has the information about our Amplify application. For example, the GraphQL endpoint, the API key, all sort of things. We need to include this application into our app.js, but it's a good idea to include it on index.js because it is the top level file in our application. And to include it, you have to copy and paste these three lines, and the lines are these three. It basically importing the Amplify tool or whatever, and it importing the AWS export file as a config variable, and it configuring the rest of the file. And now if you go to our app and refresh it and then fetch the to-dos, you got the data of the list to-dos. You got an object that is data has the list to-dos object, and the list to-dos has the item object, which is an array where we got our to-do. Awesome. But here's just one problem, and it is every time, let's say right now we just have one table and we can write the query string for that. But what if we have multiple tables, and every time we have to write down these query strings will make our code a mess, right? Luckily, we do not have to do this. If you go to the source folder, there you have a GraphQL folder that is auto-generated by Amplify itself. Every time you push your code, it will create a GraphQL folder which contains all the mutations and query strings. So if I show you, you can see here the list to do's query is somewhat like this. Okay, so let me show you how to use it. Go to your app.js and include the mutations first. So import star as queries from, give the path, and it is GraphQL / queries. Now instead of using this query string, what we can do is use it queries dot list to do's. And here I made a slight mistake. Actually, it should be, the path should be like this. Wait a second, it is dot / GraphQL / queries. And oops, I put a, and let's see whether it's working or not. Go to the React application and try to fetch to-dos, and see we got the data again. And not just query, we have mutations as well. So let's try to create a to-do using the same technique. Let's try make a function called create to-do, and make a corresponding button for that as well. And it says on click we need to trigger the create to do. Right now I'll provide some hard coded values to it. We have to provide an object, let's say my to do, which is set it equal to the property name and the property value. The to do 3, I don't know what was the number, and the description equal to some description. And to create a to-do, what we have to do actually is say response equal to, again we'll use the await, the same API class and the GraphQL method. This time our query will be mutations. We have not yet included the mutations, so let's include it. It says import star as mutations from GraphQL / mutations. So our query will be here, it's create to do, and now we have to provide the additional variable as well, because we are providing the input as well this time, and this should be equal to an object which has a property called input, which is equal to our my to do object. So let's set it equal to my to do. Wait, let's try to see if we are able to create a to do, and also whatever be the response, let's log it here, and it says response. Let's refresh the application and create a to do. It says we got some error, and the error says the input contain a field name description. Actually the error is about the typo I made here. It should be description. If you make the slight spelling mistake here while providing the property name, it will raise error. It should be the same. And if I create to do and I got the data here, and also you can verify into the table as well. If I go to that dynamo table of our to-dos and I refresh it, you can see that the to-do 3 should be here. Where it is? It is here, where we provided some description, right? Similarly, we can also delete the to-do using same pattern. And now let's spin up our development, right? So what I'll do is I'll copy and paste the code for the to do the front end, because I don't want to waste your time or teaching you the React. Okay, this tutorial is about teaching you the Amplify, right? And I'll just copy paste the code and I'll explain the code to you. What does it do? Okay, so what I did is I copied the front-end code for our application, for our to-do application, and I've also added some CSS here. Okay, so we'll not talk about the CSS, it's pretty basic thing, right? We'll talk about the code. Let's see how our application actually look like. And you can see that we have our to-dos listed here. Let's clear the console, and we do not need it anyways. And when I delete the to-do, it alerts me, and when I create one, for example, I say to-do new, and I don't want to give a description, it create a to-do instantly. Now let's try to understand what's happening in the React code, right? So first of all, you have a div, don't really care about that. You have to-dos heading, right? And you have an input for the name that set the form state of a variable form data. Next you have an input for the description that set the state of form data again, but in this case it says set the name property, and in this case it set the description property. Then you have a button called create which trigger the create to do function. And then you have a container that actually what it does, it takes all the to-dos stored in the to-dos variable. Well, to-dos variable actually is a state variable. It map the to-do and display it as you saw before, right? Now let's try to understand it from the above. So basically you have a variable called initial form state. Initially it should be empty both. Then you have two state variables, to-dos and form data. The to-dos will be will be an array of to-dos, and initially it's empty, and the initial value for the form data is this. Then we have use effect, but use as soon as our component is mount, it will fetch all the to-dos available in our database using the function fetch to-dos, the one that we just made. So what does it do? It stores the to-dos in API data and access the API data value, data property, then list to-dos property and items, where we got the array of to-dos as I saw you just before. Then you have a create to do function that is being triggered by the button below there. If the form data dot name is empty, right? If the form data do not have any value for the name variable, that means it should return, it should not create a to do. Now ask yourself one thing, do you know why we are doing it? Because name is a required property. If you provide the name with an empty string, it will raise error. GraphQL will get mad at you. And if everything is alright, we are using the api.graphql method using the query mutations.create to do, and in variables we are providing the form data, right? And then what we are doing is setting the to-dos equal to the form data. We are adding additionally the form data and keeping the initial state of the to-dos as it is. And we are setting the form data equal to its initial form, that is empty. This is what we are doing in create to do function. Next we have delete to do function that takes a ID. I show you before that the delete to do takes ID of the to do that we need to delete, right? Now it will show you an alert. It is a confirmation. Do you really want to delete this to do? If I show you again, this is the confirmation. If you say cancel, it will not run this code furthermore, and if you say OK, it will run this code from now onwards. So what does it do? It creates a new variable that filters all the to do except the one with the ID, and it will set the value of the to do to that new to do's array, right? And it will delete the to do, the one with the ID here. That's it. That's all the code here. It's pretty simple. So now it's time to push our changes to the GitHub. It's not Amplify push. We have modified the front end of the app. We did not modify the back end of the app. When we modify the backend, when we modify the serverless application, that time we do Amplify push. But since we have modified the front end, what we will do, we'll do the git push. So so first of all, you need to add everything and git commit -m with a message which says added the front end code. Great. Now just git push. Oops, I'm sorry. It says git push remote origin. Oh, the command is git push origin master. Sorry for the typo. Okay. So the application has been pushed to the GitHub. That means it should have started building on our console as well. So if I go to the all apps and go to my to do app, it shows pending, that the application is being provision that it will build and then deploy and then verify. But here's the catch. It will fail the build. And I know because we did not have modified some settings here. So we'll see the error what we are getting, then we'll modify the settings, right? So as I told you, the build got failed. In order to fix it, what you have to do is to click on the build, and every time your build fail, you have to go to this page and check out for the errors. And if you couldn't find what's going on, just copy the error, paste into the Google, and you'll find some GitHub or maybe Stack Overflow resources to help you. But I know how to fix it. So what you have to do is there are three things that you need to do with every application you push. See, why did our build fail when initially it got passed every time for all these checks? Because it was the front end only application, but now we have integrated the front end with the back end. So we have to change some of the settings on Amplify. So the first one is go to this edit and choose the staging environment here and untick this enable full stack CI/CD. I don't know what does it do. When I read the official documentation, there was an error that the AWS exports file that we need for interacting with the API, as I show you before, is generated on the cloud. But if you keep it on checked, it will not get generated. So make sure you uncheck it and choose the environment from here and save it. So we did the first thing. The second thing is you need to set the CLI version. So you go to the build settings and the build image setting. Here you choose the CLI. It is set to latest, but I don't know what's wrong with AWS. Also have the latest version for the CLI. We have to set it equal to our version of the CLI. How to check our version? You have this amplify --v command, and it will take a little bit of time, and it says 8.3.0. just copy it and paste it here. So what does it mean? So I told you that CLI create a simulating environment. CLI create a simulation for the Amplify Studio. The same thing run on the cloud. The cloud itself has the Amplify CLI, which create the environment for our application. And if the version of the CLI differs, then it might not build the application. Okay, so you have to make sure that these two are same. So save it. The third thing that you need to ensure is go to the general, and here you do not have a service role. You have to provide it with a service role. Let's say we do not have a service role yet. Yes, the new account do not have one. So we need to create a role for that. Role is something like IAM user, but these two are actually different. Right now we do not need to care about that. All you have to do, create the new role, just click on next and next and next and what does it say? Amplify role name. Okay, Amplify console backend role. Okay, so I want to create it. It says a role name this already exists. Okay, it might exist in my previous application, so let's call it 1. You won't get that red error. Now just create the role. And let's just wait for it for some time. Should be done. Yep, the role has been created. Now go back to your application and select the role from here. And this was the one that we created, right? This one. refresh existing roles. We created this one, right? Yeah. Okay, now just save it, and now go to your application. Click on the build again where we got it failed, and here is the option to redeploy this version. We have made the changes that were required. First thing we did is uncheck that checkbox. Second, we ensure the CLI version is same. Third, we created the role, and the role thing is just for the first time. When you create the Amplify application, it's just for the first time, right? And now we will redeploy this version, and let's hope that it will deploy successfully. If it doesn't, then we will look at the errors and try to resolve what can be done. Great, we passed all these checks, right? And if I go to our app and click on this link, and we have our app ready. Let's create a awesome to do, and the description should be we made it till here. So if you have any doubt regarding this video or any doubt regarding AWS itself, you can ask in the comment. We'll try to resolve your queries as soon as possible. Good luck with your journey in AWS. Thank you for watching, and make sure you drop your doubts in the comments.